Brother Student Minister from Mosque number 55.
Thank you,
Brother
brother.
Demetric
I'm
Muhammad.
honored to be here. Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
Brooklyn, stand
yes,
up.
sir. Yes, sir. Honored to be here, brother.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So it's a pleasure to have you on our show.
I'm honored, brother. Thank you for having me.
Yes, sir. What I really want to do, we want to talk about the topic of the history of Malcolm X and the murder of Malcolm X. You came into the city to do the topic of y'all kill Malcolm.
Yeah, didn't y'all kill Malcolm?
Didn't y'all kill Malcolm?
Yeah.
Okay, my correction. So we want to stay with that theme and get some history on at that time in the 1960s what was going on with Malcolm. But first, I want to get a brief history of yourself, because some people might be like, you know, ask the question, what might make you qualified to answer these questions and things like that. So to the audience, could you give a brief history of yourself, how long you've been in the nation, and what exactly you do?
Sure. Again, very grateful and thankful for the opportunity to talk with you, brothers. Brothers I have a lot of great respect and admiration for, and think of you every time I put on my MP3 player, you know, and listen to the great Lost Sheep mixes, where you all have blended the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan's messages with some of today's popular hip-hop tracks. It's helping me in my fitness drive. I'm on the treadmill and so forth, so I'm honored to be here. But as you stated, I'm Brother Demetric Muhammad, and I've been in the nation, I think maybe 25 years now. I came in as a teenager, growing up down south, growing up in Mississippi, and maybe when I was 15 years of age, that's when I got my axe. I was so young that my father had to sign permission for me to get registered in the Nation of Islam, because he was studying the teachings at that time. And really ever since that time, the teachings have been my passion. And so over the years, we've worked in various aspects within the nation, primarily as in the student ministry, and done a lot of different things in that regard. In 2010, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan invited us to be a part of his research team. And so for the last 5, almost 6 years, we've served in that capacity along with some other great brothers and sisters who helped the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan with historical, scriptural, and other kinds of research. And so we've taken up this subject, Didn't Y'all Kill Malcolm, because as we travel and we engage, especially with younger populations, we realize that this is a myth that is very strong among so-called millennials, as well as those who are younger. Whenever they hear Minister Farrakhan, they are, like most of us, quite excited, quite magnetized by his message, and they love what the minister has to say. But then a subsequent thought comes up in their mind: man, that's the guy that killed Malcolm. And so black youth are really a target of a propaganda and smear campaign against the Nation of Islam, because they remain where they are, doing what they do, never coming to become a part of the work of the minister, and never submitting to the reform that the minister teaches that will help them in their own life, because after all, that's the man that killed Malcolm.
Right.
So that's kind of the backdrop of our motivation for dealing with this subject, wanting to help the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan to be freed of having to deal with this.
Right. In my sojourn in the Nation of Islam, I've come across many different type of mindsets who have said not only that the minister, you know, killed Malcolm, that Elijah had something to do with it, or they'll say the nation did it, or y'all did it. You know, even soldiering, y'all did it, pointing at me like I wasn't even in the nation at that time when you know, Malcolm was killed. But let's go to the essence where it all started, the conflict between Malcolm and the nation, when he said, you know, his famous, infamous statement that the chickens come home to roost. And then there was a period between that statement and a time where he just began to speak out against the nation. What do you think was the thing that set him off between that period of time to allow him to speak out against the nation? What began that conflict in his time of being silenced?
Well, you know, I can't speak for Brother Malcolm, and don't claim to, but from what we can gather from the history that exists is that Malcolm was upset based upon the fact that at that time he was the most popular of all of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's ministers. And sometimes when you're popular like that, you can be on the receiving end, you know, of some harsh treatment. You know, and so Malcolm felt in his own mind that he was not being handled properly by other officials, people inside the nation. So if you'll notice, when he left the nation, his early press conferences stated that I'm still a follower of Mr. Muhammad. I just believe I can help Mr. Muhammad better on the outside of the nation. So Malcolm was reacting to internal organizational dynamics, which are common to any organization. The Nation of Islam is not unique in that regard.
Right.
And that's not an indictment on the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to say we have our own internal dynamics.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's a field of study that has been devoted to organizational history, structure, and dynamics. People study what makes a healthy organization and what are some of the challenges of organizations. And so Malcolm was reacting to that. And so he left saying, I'm still a follower of Mr. Muhammad, and I'm going to promote his teachings and message on the outside of the nation. So he was not leaving because he disbelieved in the teachings. He was not leaving because he didn't love the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. He was leaving because of how he felt he was being treated and mishandled by other officials and people inside the nation because of just natural organizational dynamics.
So for the record, he wasn't expelled from the nation.
No, he wasn't expelled
left
from
on
the
his own
nation.
accord.
He was suspended for 90 days from public speaking. You know, but again, as we shared with the sister on Friday night, you know, Malcolm was a man who, as a minister of a mosque, was responsible for adjudicating the various affairs of the believers. So he had disciplined people before, you know, and if you listen and read to some of the things that he's written, you know, he talks about understanding that the one who gives the law and the one who has to put or discipline others, he must be willing to submit to discipline himself. So Malcolm understood it, even if 50 years later, younger people don't understand, well, if he spoke the truth, why was he silenced for 90 days?
Right.
You know, he violated a direct instruction.
Right.
You know, and since he was one who was used to dealing with people who violated direct instructions, he knew he had to submit because he was one who made others submit.
Right. Correct. There's also not only internal strife with Malcolm, but there were outside forces that were working against the nation and Malcolm at that time to prevent the reconciliation between Malcolm and Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and then further, you know, keep them apart. What do we know historically on some of those things that our enemy, that the government used to keep us apart?
I'm glad you
keep
raised
Malcolm
that.
and Elijah apart.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that because see, the assassination of Malcolm X was the end result of a process. The first or the initial stage of the process was under J. Edgar Hoover's direct instructions. Agent provocateurs and informants were put inside the nation. Now those are two types that are from the same agency, the FBI, but they are important to know the difference. An informant, their job is to report on the activities of the group that they've been inserted into. But the agent provocateur, he's one who acts. He's one who actually, and the idea is to be inserted in a body, commit a crime in the name of that body that now justifies law enforcement's or arresting of the members of that body and the dismantling of that organization. So the agent provocateur is supposed to give the authorities a door with which they can legally walk in. So they're not just content with just, oh yeah, they had 100 people out tonight, or they gave $1,000 in charity, or they sold this many papers. That's the informant. He just informing. But that agent provocateur, he is an actor, and he does dirt in the name of the organization or the body that he's inserted in, you know, so that before the eyes of the world and before law enforcement authorities, the organization can look like it's dirty and corrupt. So the Nation of Islam had these two different types inserted among them. And their role was to help separate Brother Malcolm from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad by creating factions. So of course Malcolm, as he became popular, there were people outside of the nation who loved the fire and brimstone ministry of Brother Malcolm, but they didn't want to live a moral life or religious life, if you will, by coming inside the nation. So they remained on the periphery. You know, they would support Brother Malcolm, and so this caused Malcolm to feel like he had a following on the outside of the nation, which he did to some extent. And so you had those who were loyal to him inside the nation. Those on the outside of the nation, they comprised a faction for Malcolm. Then you had those who remained loyal to the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That's another faction. Now Malcolm breaks away. He's separate. Now that he's separated away from the nation, he becomes easy to take out, and you blame the nation. And so there's a memo that was released by the Freedom of Information Act during the COINTELPRO days. Well, I say during the COINTELPRO days. Truth is, those days are still today. But where they take credit for creating a faction within the nation that led to the killing of Malcolm. And they said that they were so successful that they could use that model as a recipe to take down other organizations up to and including foreign nations. So this same body, the FBI, they use what they learned in the assassination of Brother Malcolm to also kill Mark Clark and Fred Hampton, who were the young Chicago Black Panther Party leaders. And they have written about this in their internal memos that's now available through the Freedom of Information Act.
This is deeper than we thought, than the general masses could think. Just to get an idea, because there's always this misconception in blaming the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan for the murder of Malcolm X, that he was this big, powerful, you know, Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan at that time in 1965. People don't know that he wasn't even Farrakhan at that time. His name was Louis X. So can you give us an idea of the power that he had at that time, or the lack thereof, for him to even call something like that into existence?
Well,
for Malcolm to do, you know, any harm to come to Malcolm?
Sure. I mean, your point is that, you know, the Minister Farrakhan that he is today, he was certainly not that in the early 1960s, right, even though he was a beloved and respected minister of the Boston Temple or the Boston Mosque. And he was in this area to fill in the rotation at Muhammad's Mosque number 25 in Newark. But the minister has never been, see, you know, there's no statute of limitations on murder. And this is an important fact that I'm going to raise. There's no statute of limitations on murder. So if there was evidence, and if there are facts associated Minister Farrakhan to Malcolm's assassination, with all of the people in higher positions in America who hate the minister, he would have long been arrested and charged and blamed with the murder of Malcolm. But they know such evidence or no connections exist, but they allow it to float out there as propaganda because they want black youth to believe that this is the man that killed Malcolm X, whom we've given to you as your hero. Fact about it, as we showed in the presentation, when Malcolm passed away, or when he was assassinated, I should say, the obituaries in the newspapers mocked him, ridiculed him, said he wasted his life, he was not a quote-unquote responsible Negro leader. So Malcolm leaves this earth in infamy. How does a man like that, a man who has an entry devoted to him in the dictionary of anti-Semitism, how does he end up on an American postage stamp? How is he reintroduced into society? If you look at the history, Malcolm's reintroduction into society coincides directly with the rise of Minister Louis Farrakhan's rebuilding of the Nation of Islam. And when he was in this city in 1985, Power at Last Forever, and more than 50,000 people came out to see him at Madison Square Garden. They also filled up the Felt Forum, and there were thousands of people in the streets. You know, it was after that that many people began to say that the Nation of Islam has been rebuilt, and Louis Farrakhan is the preeminent leader of Black America. It's right after this that Malcolm is reintroduced, and his autobiography is promoted among young people, and so young people begin to see him as their hero, and they associate with Malcolm's reintroduction. They tie into it the lie and the notion that it was this man that we know y'all like him. You know, you hear him in Public Enemy songs. All of the rappers are sampling him, and they're putting on Farrakhan t-shirts, and Ice Cube is saying, if you touch Farrakhan, you're going to have to deal with me. So wait a minute, before y'all get all caught up in Farrakhan, let us tell you the real. He's the one that killed Malcolm, which is your real hero. You know, and there's something about, you know, people that is easy for us to follow someone from beyond the grave because they are not present to actually put demands on us and to require anything of us. We can cheerlead a great one that's long gone, but it takes some real serious commitment to walk lockstep and behind a living man who can give you some instruction, some guidance, and put some expectation on you. And so the people apparently gravitate toward Malcolm because, again, he's not here. And so all over America, among young people, there is this thought, Farrakhan killed Malcolm, when if he had anything to do with it, he would have long been arrested. It wouldn't have been a Million Man March. He would have been arrested. There wouldn't have been a World Friendship Tour. He would have been arrested. There would have been none of the things that we know of today because he would have been arrested for being either the murderer or an accomplice or aiding and abetting the murderers. But none of that has been leveled at the minister's door.
There was also a meeting of reconciliation between between the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan and Malcolm's widow, Betty Shabazz, in 1995 at the Apollo Theater for her daughter, who was supposedly Kubila, who was supposedly involved in a plot to hire Michael Fitzpatrick, I think his name was, to kill Minister Farrakhan. Do we have any information on Michael Fitzpatrick, on who he was, or how that relationship between him and Kabila started to hire him, or was that even true?
Well, apparently they were childhood friends, of course. He was a member of the Jewish community, and the real lesson from that whole scenario, which is quite profound, is that, you know, when you think about it, if any of us sitting in this room, if law enforcement came to us and said, the angel Jabril, we've uncovered a plot to assassinate you, but don't worry, we have the conspirators, we've arrested them, and you can go ahead on and live your life in peace. Most of us would breathe a sigh of relief. But in the case of the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, he always is able to see the hidden hand. The minister ain't playing checkers, as they say. Right. He's playing chess, and he can see several moves ahead, and he understood that this was an effort by the government to entrap a young woman who was distraught over the violent killing of her father. And that the minister's reaction would not be to come into agreement with the government. The minister's reaction was the total opposite. He helped mount a defense for a young woman who had been arrested for trying to kill him, and put in huge letters on the cover of his newspaper, the Final Call, where he's the publisher of record, free Kubila, and hosted this event raising money and what have you for a defense fund. So this shows that this man, Minister Farrakhan, he's an unusual man. He's a man that is motivated not out of self-aggrandizement, not out of power, but a man motivated out of love for his people. So the minister is willing to suffer someone thinking that they're going to try to kill him, because he really knows Allah won't allow them to do that. And if Allah does allow, the minister has said, I submit to it. But the minister is willing to suffer from our people to help redeem and save our people. And that's the lesson from that whole scenario that I try to emphasize to people, because the minister went on the defense of Malcolm's daughter when she was arrested for trying to kill the minister. Now, does that sound like the actions of a man who had killed her father?
Not at all.
So these are things that the public needs to know, because they don't know it.
Right.
You know, so these things have to be brought out. The good of a man that's among us, that's constantly vilified by the press.
Well, I want to, I know Brother Mustafa has a question. I wanted to close out with a spiritual question.
Sure.
Because I know not only that you're proficient in a historical basis with Malcolm, but I wanted to ask a spiritual question concerning the two things that are stumbling blocks for the Nation of Islam moving on. As you know, Malcolm X's murder is one, and the other one is the wives of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Notice I said wives instead of teenage secretaries. But in the Western civilization, it's hard to grasp the concept of men taking on more wives, more or less a man of God being ordered to take on wives. And we've seen this historically in Scripture, where different prophets and men of God have taken on wives, some of them younger women. Why do you think that it is ordered for men of God to take on different wives? Why does God do that?
Again,
Specifically younger wives.
I can't speak for Malcolm, and I certainly can't speak for Allah, but I can say that from my limited understanding, you know, polygamy globally is more the norm than it is an exception. Inside of America, where there's a lot of moral hypocrisy that takes place, it's more the exception than the norm. But even as we talked about in our presentation, even great Christian luminaries like Billy Graham have talked about the hypocrisy of a culture that would frown on a man accepting the responsibility of plural wives, but it would celebrate a man who has a wife and 4 or 5 mistresses who he's just having sexual relationships with without no responsibility. So that's the hypocrisy of Western society that looks down on a cultural practice and norm that is practiced in among many black, brown, red, and yellow peoples. Certainly in the history of Islam, plural marriages were permitted because during that period of time there were many wars, and wars decimate male population. And when you deal with those ancient societies that were mostly agrarian or agricultural based, you don't have career women. You don't have women going out from the home working jobs. So if a woman's husband goes off to war and he dies, now he leaves a family destitute with no other options for to be maintained or sustained. And so Allah permitted a certain amount of wives to be taken. But even in that early history of Islam, the Prophet of Allah, he was given the permission to have more than 4 wives. He was given to have more wives than was the quote-unquote rank and file member of the Islamic community. And so that is, of course, by Allah's determination. Why he does that, I can't say definitively, but I can say, again, from my limited understanding that, you know, as I heard Minister Farrakhan say once, that when Allah chooses a man or makes a covenant with a man, he makes a covenant with that man's seed. You know, and so if a prophet or messenger of God represents something of an ideal or an archetype among a people, you know, a human being that has found favor in the eyes of God, then God wants to see that man extended as far into the future as possible. And so having more than one wife and children helps to satisfy that desire.
That's beautiful. Well, you sum it up for me. I mean, most thing I'm worried about is, most people worried about, and where do we go from here for the Million Man March? And that's one of my questions I'm going to ask you.
Well, that's a great question. I really love to talk about that, because we were talking about that tonight. The minister has asked for 10,000 fearless men and fearless women to boldly go. into crime-ridden areas in the black community all over America. And our primary work will be helping our people peacefully resolve their conflict. So we talked tonight about principles of conflict resolution that we have been taught in Islam as Muslims, that even though our people may or may not be Muslims, these are universal principles that we can teach them and help them to grasp that will help them reorder the affairs of their life. You know, when you really get down to the root of it, in the black community, we lack discipline. Our affairs are not in any kind of order. We react based upon emotion. We react based upon our low desire. We react based upon a desire for material gain, sexual gratification, status among our peers. So these are things that certain principles can help us come to bring under control, so that the way we live our life actually immunizes us against the encroachment of conflict into our life. See, any two people can come to a table and have a mediator solve their differences. But if that two people who had their differences resolved don't commit to change the way they conduct their affairs, it won't be but a matter of time before they'll be back at the same table before either the same mediator or different mediators. So we want to help our people learn the way of peace, not just to set up a table and say, come over here and let us enjoy beef. Yeah, we can do that, but we want to show them, okay, brother, now, since domestic violence is a problem, black men got to learn how to deal with a woman. Black women got to learn how to deal with her man, with respect, with honesty, not on a basis of being oppressed or suppressed or abused, but most of the conflicts in the black community revolve around unresolved conflicts between male-female relationships. And now law enforcement officials all over the country, I went to a seminar between law enforcement and clergy, and they were telling pastors and imams and ministers, tell the members of your congregation that if we are called for domestic violence, somebody is going to jail. Because in times past, you had the old familiar scenario.
That's right.
The brother get paid on Friday, he'd go out and drink off all his paycheck, he'd come back home, and then him and his old lady, they duking it out. The police come, and they say, well, look, y'all just keep it down. You know, y'all need to resolve this, go somewhere and cool off. They're not doing that no more, because too many people came up dead by trying to give the domestic violence situation the quote-unquote benefit of the doubt. So now if they roll up on the scene and there's some evidence that somebody has been abusing the other party, that person is going to jail. So if we can begin to teach, that's the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us, go to the root. The root of it is we are uncivilized and we do not know how to properly conduct our affairs, whether it's between husband, wife, common law husband, common law wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, mom and dad. You know how we do it in the hood. Some of us ain't got no real husband or wife, but we've been living together for 10 years.
Right.
You know, so we now have to say, hey, brother, look, there's a certain way you have to handle this woman. You know, and it ain't with as a tyrant or an ogre, but it's respect. Knowing who she is and what her value is and how God sees her and how he would favor you if you maintained her. You know, so these are that's where we go from here. You know, of course, you know about the Black Friday and Christmas boycott, the economic withdrawal from the holiday. That's a major action item. So I would tell anybody, go to justiceorelse.com, NOI.org. The minister has devoted a lot of resources into follow-up from 10-10-15.
I wanted to answer the critics.
Yes.
Because we have a lot of critics in the Nation of Islam. And that's the major thing when you do interviews and you speak to people. They want to know the hard questions. They want to know why this, why that, things of that nature. 10-10-15 was a great success. There was a lot of people there. There was 1 million people there. The minister, he did his tour. It was fantastic. I was at a lot of the meetings, and he was driving what you just mentioned, the boycott. But it seemed for some reason at the march, our critics would say that nobody mentioned the boycott. It wasn't driven as hard as he was on tour talking about it. Is there? Do you see was there? What would you tell the critics? To
Well, the
those
minister-
who had that type of critique.
Well, the minister did mention a boycott. The minister did talk about the economic withdrawal of Christmas. But I would also emphasize the fact that this was not a moment where our activities would cease. That's the reason why the minister didn't call it a march. He referred to it as a gathering, because a gathering is an event that's a part of a larger movement. And so even that day, if you will remember, the minister called for an immediate follow-up activity, which was the convening of professional people, university presidents, professors, scholars, that next day that he spoke to at the Marriott Hotel. And there is planning right now to involve those professionals and scholars and other aspects of this work as we call for justice for our people. So I think that sometimes people have critiques that, number one, are really opinions that are not based on fact. Number two, no activity among black people should be deemed as perfect. You know, this is a work in progress. And I would say to any critic, you know, don't critique from the sidelines. Come over here and help us. You know, help us to bring about, you know, a better condition for our people. That's what we all want. You don't have to be a Muslim. You know, you don't have to join the mosque,
Right.
but you should be a conscientious black brother or sister who wants to see justice for our people and wants to see our people in a better way. And then once you get inside of it, then you begin to understand more from within than you ever could from without, and you find out, oh, I don't have the same critique anymore because I see what's taking place. And I should say the Nation of Islam, brother, is not a community that receives funding from the U.S. government. It receives resistance from the U.S. government. Right. We don't get private donations from philanthropists or corporate America. Those kinds of people oppose us. So the progress that the minister makes, he makes it against overwhelming opposition. I mean, I don't know if we had 1 million, but we at least had several 100,000. And that was primarily done through an 82-year-old man touring America and social media. So, you know, understand what you're looking at.
Right.
You know, understand the overwhelming odds that the minister in the nation is facing. And if you care for your people, you will want to come and help a man who all his life has done nothing but help his people.
Yes, sir. Well, we're going to close out, but I just wanted to get the last question in. I don't know if Brother Mustafa might have one more. But what will be, concerning the 10,000, what will be the determining factor that will choose who to be part of the 10,000? What are some of the factors that will be able to determine who will be part of it and who is not qualified?
Well, at this point, it's kind of like they used to sing in the church, brother. Whosoever will, let him come. You know, and I don't think that the minister has placed out any criteria other than being fearless. That's criteria enough. I seem to remember something in the scripture, it may have been Gideon. You know, he had a lot of people with him, and God tested him. He said, have them go down to the brook and drink water. And it was some, you know, they were kind of uppity, so they formed the water, they formed their hands into a cup, and just put their hands down and kind of in a dignified way, you know, got some water out. But then there was other who bent down on their knees, taking a position of humility, and drank the water straight from the brook. And so God told Gideon, just take those. And they greatly decimated the number that he initially had. So, you know, Allah looks at the heart. You know, we can't see the heart, but Allah sees the heart. And the conditions in the hood, you know, will weed out those who are afraid. See, we really, in the Nation of Islam, we've been going in the hood for a long time.
That's right.
You know, and the fact about it, we've been effective wherever we've been allowed to go. In the early 90s, the FOI organized themselves in what they call the dope busters. And they were so effective in ridding public housing communities of crime and violence. Now, this is not just, you know, bumping your gums. See, but when you remove crime and violence, and apartment communities go from having a 50 and 60% vacancy rate to having a waiting list for people to want to live over there. See, now you've affected economics. Now you have paved the way for the people who live there to earn more money, the owners of those properties to earn more money off those properties. So in other words, our work in the community produces a real tangible effect that's quantifiable in terms of dollars, in terms of number of lives saved. That's our work. And so I think you're going to see, as a result of this 10,000 Fearless, at least some modified version of that early work that the Dope Busters did come to birth once again, because all over America, people are afraid of the hood, and all over America, even police, when they go in and there's a certain amount of fear, and that fear trumps whatever respect they may have for the people. So we end up with what we see on the TV almost daily, with some innocent, unarmed black person being shot, by police officers. And so, that is what's before us in terms of the work of 10,000 Fearless. Mm-hmm. What will weed you out is if you're not fearless. And the conditions is in that hood will show it up. If you're afraid of either our uncivilized people or corrupt members of police agencies, it'll show up, and then you'll retreat. You'll turn on your heels. But if you're fearless, you remain in the trenches and help our people.
Yes, sir. Brother Mustafa?
Well, my conclusion is our youth right now, Minister Farrakhan praised our youth, and you see a lot of, it's not the movement right now with young people. They're dealing with justice. They are in the forefront. There's not one person that can pinpoint, is this group is leading everything up. Different groups of young people is coming out right now. Different organizations calling the shots right now. So older people right now, like those like Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, they like, the young people is like, move on the side. We can take it over. We got this.
Yeah.
So I see the minister talk about the young people. He loved the young people so much, Minister Louis Farrakhan, and they love him, the young people. Why do the young people respect Minister Farrakhan more than any other leader out here? To me, the respect they have for him, the hip hop, the artists out here, all the top artists out there, Puffy, everybody, they have a serious respect for the minister.
Well, I would say it like this, and I'm in agreement with you. The minister enjoys a luxury that most leaders who've been around as long as he has does not enjoy. And that is a huge approval rating among millennials and even the teen population. And what you find is that it has to do with what is most valued as a virtue among young people today. And that is what they call keeping it real, which you would say in using more refined words as authenticity, and integrity. And the minister has an overabundance of both. And so they hear, man, just like when he was here and he was on the Breakfast Club, he said a few choice words on the Breakfast Club, Now, some people in, prim and proper settings would have said, oh, well, you're a minister, you shouldn't use those kind of choice words. But among the young people, they said, wow, that man keeps it real. He speaks truth to power. And even if they don't understand the religion and some of the nuances of the Nation of Islam, they're drawn to a man who speaks the truth, who's not afraid to speak truth to power, and who's honest, and who's candid, and who's even willing to use episodes in his own life to present himself before them as transparent. He's see-through, and so I think this is at the root of why the youth love Farrakhan, not to forget the fact that, the youth have come to birth at a time period where the minister is on scene. And I like to believe, from the spiritual standpoint, that the young people, you know, were born for Farrakhan's message. You know, think about it. You know, the young people, they don't respect any other kind of authority, because most authorities in this corrupt and wicked world are corrupt and wicked. You know, but they hear a man, a voice. You know, and so I certainly think about Scripture when Jesus said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me." You know, and so the minister is that man that has the ear of the youth, but he has the ear of the older ones of us too. We're trying to be youthful in attitude and youthful in mindset. You know, so we thank Allah over and over again for real mercy that He's given to us in Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And if we live to be 1,000, we could never thank Allah enough for such a wonderful blessing as a man like that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, brother.
Brother, thank you.
Brother,
I appreciate the opportunity.
Coming into Brooklyn,
be
coming into
long-winded,
Harlem. You answered those questions very precisely, and I think our listening audience will be very satisfied with your answers. So we'd like to thank you, thank our brother Minister Hafiz, thank our brother Captain Richard, Lord Sheep, Harlem Mosque number 7 has made history with this interview, and we just like to say peace, and we out.